Elijah never liked attention. He was the kind of student who sat near the back, not to hide, but to observe. While other students whispered about dances, drama, or weekend parties, Elijah was reading scientific journals or building circuits. Out of scrap wires he found in old tech bins. He was 17, smart, focused, and yes, he was black, in a school where very few students looked like him. Every morning he arrived early, a simple hoodie, worn sneakers, backpack slung over one shoulder. He always nodded respectfully at the janitor, the cafeteria lady, even the assistant principal, though he rarely got a nod back. That didn't matter to Elijah. What mattered was the work. This year, Elijah had his eyes on one thing: the statewide academic decathlon. It was the biggest intellectual competition of the year, the kind that opened doors to scholarships, universities, and future dreams. And Elijah? He had the highest prep test scores in the school. No one could deny it. No one except Principal Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds wasn't cruel on the surface. He was the kind of administrator who smiled in school photos, hosted charity golf events, and shook hands with every board member. But when it came to Elijah, there was always a pause, a second look, a subtle narrowing of the eyes. During the decathlon prep sessions, Elijah noticed that he was often left out of the deeper strategy meetings. His input was ignored. Sometimes, even his study materials mysteriously went missing from the shared files. He didn't complain. He just worked harder. He stayed late in the library, rebuilt notes from scratch, refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him frustrated. But people noticed, especially Mr. Reynolds. One afternoon, just 2 weeks before the big competition, Elijah was called to the front office. He walked in, expecting maybe a scheduling update. Instead, he found Principal Reynolds seated behind the desk, a serious expression on his face. On the table was a manila folder. Next to it, a printed copy of the decathlon questions. Elijah froze. Reynolds leaned forward. "Do you want to explain how these got into your locker?" Elijah blinked. "What is that?" "Don't play dumb." Reynolds snapped, not loud but sharp. "These are confidential competition questions. Unauthorized possession is considered academic fraud. I've never seen those before." Elijah's voice was calm, but a tremor laced through it. "Your locker, your responsibility." Reynolds folded his arms. "Effective immediately, you're suspended from all team activities. We'll review whether you walk at graduation. Just like that. No hearing, no evidence, no chance to explain." Elijah stood in stunned silence. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was confused. "Sir, this doesn't make sense. Why would I risk everything?" "Because people like you," Reynolds said flatly, "always want shortcuts. You're not as clever as you think." There it was. The mask dropped, just long enough for Elijah to see the truth, and that truth cut deeper than any accusation. He walked out of the office in silence. Other students stared. Some whispered. Some smirked. And Elijah, he kept walking. Head high, heart-breaking, cue, slow music swell, subtle emotional chord progression, voice-over whisper for cap-cut timing. They didn't need proof, they just needed a reason. And I was convenient. Elijah sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. The printed sheet, the one Principal Reynolds had accused him of stealing, was burned into his memory. He didn't recognize the font, the format, anything. But that didn't matter. They had already decided. His mother, Denise, stood in the hallway, one hand covering her mouth as she held the suspension letter. "They said what?" she asked again, her voice shaking. Elijah didn't answer right away. Finally, he whispered, "They think I cheated." Denise blinked, the silence between them thick with disbelief. Then she sat next to her son and grabbed his hand tightly. "Baby, you know I'm going down to that school tomorrow, right?" He nodded slowly, but his face said something else. He already knew that nothing would change. The next morning, Denise showed up at the school in her work uniform. Tired eyes, fierce voice. She marched into the office and demanded a meeting with Reynolds. He smiled politely, offered her coffee, then told her there was nothing more to discuss. This decision was made with the best interest of academic integrity in mind, he said coldly. We don't take these things lightly. Denise's voice cracked. My son doesn't cheat. He studies till his eyes hurt. He helps out with his little brother. He's got a college acceptance letter from 3 schools already. Reynolds just nodded. Then this unfortunate incident won't define him, but we must protect the school's standards. And just like that, the meeting ended. Elijah wasn't just suspended from the decathlon. He was removed from the school newspaper, removed from the honor society, removed from the list of student speakers at graduation. His name began to vanish. Hallways that used to buzz with hellos now turned silent as he passed. Students who once studied with him now avoided eye contact. Some whispered, others giggled. Did you hear? Guess he wasn't that smart after all. Rumors were louder than facts, and the truth nowhere to be found. There was only one person, one voice, who dared to reach out, Ms. Rivera, a soft-spoken science teacher who had mentored Elijah since sophomore year. She called his home. I just needed you to know, Elijah, she said, voice trembling slightly. I don't believe what they're saying. He swallowed hard. Thank you, but I don't think that matters anymore. Oh, but it does. She paused, then added, they may have taken your spot on that team, but they can't take your mind. Over the next few weeks, Ms. Rivera began slipping Elijah worksheets, practice exams, study guides, all off the record. All quietly, he would sit at the kitchen table late into the night, books spread around him like a fortress. His mother watched from the doorway, holding back tears. Meanwhile, Principal Reynolds moved on. He praised the new decathlon lineup publicly. He shook hands with donors, smiled in newsletters. No one asked him about Elijah anymore, because erasing someone is easy when they don't make noise. But Elijah was learning how to speak louder without saying a word. Cue soft rising strings, the kind that stir quiet determination, voiceover whisper for pacing. They took away everything except my fire. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Even Elijah's little brother, Jaden, had stopped asking why his big brother wasn't at school anymore. He just sat outside his bedroom, sketching superheroes, heroes who wore capes and saved the day. But Elijah didn't feel like a hero. He felt invisible. At night, Elijah would lie awake and stare at the ceiling. The betrayal echoed louder than any insult, not just from Principal Reynolds, but from the silence of the teachers who said nothing, from the classmates who once cheered for him and now looked away, from the school that once called him the future and now treated him like a mistake. But in the silence, something else began to grow. Resolve. Each time he reviewed textbook, each time he solved a math problem on his own, each time he saw his mom crying quietly in the kitchen, but still cooking him breakfast anyway, he wasn't just studying now. He was building something, not revenge, but proof. Ms. Rivera continued to support him, always discreet. One day, she dropped off a package at his door. Inside, a full practice exam written by a professor at the local university. A letter of recommendation she had written, without being asked, and a note that said, what they took from you is temporary. What's inside you is permanent. But not everyone believed in him. Across town, the real culprit, a student named Brandon Hale, was laughing at a party. Brandon was the son of a school board trustee, blonde hair, football star, never late, never punished. It was his prank that had left the test answers in Elijah's locker. He'd bragged about it once, just loud enough for others to hear, but no one dared to report him, because Brandon had protection, and Elijah had himself. 3 weeks before graduation, Elijah received an email. You may participate in the ceremony if no further incidents occur. This is a courtesy. Do not expect special recognition. Principal Reynolds. Elijah read it twice. A courtesy? They were letting him show up, as long as he stayed silent. No apology, no reinstatement, no truth. His mother wanted to fight it. "Oh, you, Elijah. They humiliated you. Say something." But Elijah just smiled, not bitter, just steady. "They think silence protects them. But silence is how I got here in the first place." So he prepared. He pressed his gown, polished his shoes, wrote something on a folded sheet of paper, something no one would see until the time was right. He didn't know if there would be a moment, but if it came, he'd be ready. Music swells gently, not triumphant, but purposeful. Voiceover. Whisper. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes the truth whispers loud enough. Elijah returned to school grounds for the first time in weeks, not to reclaim his title, not to protest, just to show up. He walked through the gates like a ghost in daylight. Some students looked surprised. Others looked away. Brandon smirked. From across the courtyard. "Guess the janitor's back," he muttered to his friend. Elijah heard, but said nothing, because that's what they expected him to do. Inside, banners for graduation hung from the ceiling. Class of Integrity, Class of Pride, Class of 20XX. The irony stung. He walked to the counseling office to confirm his participation in the ceremony. They handed him a robe, a name card. No smile, no eye contact, just procedure. In the hallway, he passed Principal Reynolds. Their eyes met for the first time since that day in the office. Reynolds nodded politely, almost like he was nodding to paperwork, not a person. "We're glad you chose to finish strong," he said. Elijah didn't blink. "I didn't come back for your permission." Reynolds' lips tightened. Then he walked away. That afternoon, Ms. Rivera pulled Elijah aside behind the library. "I submitted your independent portfolio." Elijah froze. "My what?" "All your work. The hours you spent rebuilding your project. From scratch. I sent it to the Regional Academic Board." He looked stunned. She continued. "They were very impressed. They're sending someone to attend graduation." Elijah's eyes widened. "Wait, why?" "Let's just say, some truths are too powerful to stay buried." Meanwhile, Brandon was laughing in the parking lot, tossing a football, bragging to a group of friends. He was chosen as Honor Graduate of the Year. He would give the first speech. He would sit front row. He would wear the medal. The school board had already approved it, because names like his came with immunity. And names like Elijah's came with suspicion. But something else was happening behind the scenes. Ms. Rivera had made copies of the original locker footage from that week, including timestamps. A janitor, the same one Elijah always greeted, had quietly passed them to her after noticing something strange the day of the incident. Footage showing Brandon walking past Elijah's locker when no one else was around. She hadn't told Elijah yet, not because she didn't trust him, but because she knew he wouldn't need it to prove who he was. The night before graduation, Elijah stood in front of the mirror. His suit was pressed. His cap and gown hung ready. He unfolded a small slip of paper from his pocket, the one he'd been writing on for weeks. It was his speech, not one for the stage, but one for the moment, if it ever came. He looked in the mirror, and for the first time in weeks he didn't see a victim. He saw a man walking into fire and refusing to be burned. Music fades into a slow swell, like a dawn rising slowly. Behind a mountain, voiceover whisper, "They buried the truth, but it kept growing anyway." The sun rose slowly over Crestwood High. It was graduation day. Hundreds of students lined up in their robes, laughter echoing across the courtyard, tassels dancing in the morning breeze. Parents filled the rows of folding chairs, holding balloons. Cameras and dreams. The gymnasium had been transformed. A large stage sat in front of a sea of blue chairs. A gold banner read, "Crestwood Class of the Future." But not everyone believed that future was for everyone. Elijah arrived quietly. No crowd greeted him. No classmates high-fived. But his mother stood at the entrance, proud, radiant, eyes misty. She held his face in both hands. "Doesn't matter if they clap," she whispered. You walk like the ground belongs to you. And he did. Inside, Principal Reynolds stood, backstage fixing his tie and rehearsing his opening speech. Next to him, Brandon waited in his seat. Golden sash, gleaming metal, smug smile. Think they'll cry when I speak? Brandon joked. Reynolds chuckled lightly. Just stick to the script. You're representing the school now, Brandon smirked. Always have. The ceremony began, the national anthem played, teachers clapped, students tossed up peace signs and waved at their families. Then Reynolds stepped forward to the podium. Good morning. Today we celebrate achievement, perseverance, and the bright promise of tomorrow. His voice rang polished and rehearsed. He spoke about integrity, values, and the honor of hard work, words that floated through the gym, but fell heavy on Elijah's row. Then came the student awards. One by one, names were called, medals handed out, photos snapped. And finally, our honor graduate of the year, Brandon Hale. Applause thundered. Brandon strutted up, flashing his teeth to the crowd. He took the mic, tapped it for dramatic effect, then launched into his speech. Success doesn't come from being the loudest. It comes from being the best. He glanced sideways, directly at Elijah. Some people cheat to win, others are the win. Laughter rippled through part of the audience. Principal Reynolds smiled. Elijah sat still, unmoving, unbothered. Because he knew what was coming next. Ms. Rivera sat 3 rows back, holding a sealed envelope in her lap. Inside, the time-stamped security footage, a signed affidavit from the janitor. A copy of Elijah's scholarship acceptance is with full honors. She didn't need to stand. She didn't need to scream. Because what they'd built was undeniable. Then came the final moment. Reynolds returned to the podium. Before we close, today's ceremony, one last award, our highest recognition, the Crestwood Pillar of Academic Excellence. He glanced at the name card. The smile faded slightly, because he didn't recognize the nomination. It wasn't on the original list. This year's recipient, Elijah Brooks. The room fell silent. Even Brandon turned in his seat. Elijah rose, walked slowly down the aisle. The gym shook, not with applause, but with stunned quiet, and as he climbed the stage, Principal Reynolds hesitated, then extended the certificate with a hand that barely stopped shaking. Elijah took it with a nod. Then he reached into his pocket, unfolded a small sheet of paper, and began to read. Music shifts. Soft piano builds tension. A drum beat begins faintly underneath. Voice-over whisper. He stood where they tried to keep him from, and now, the truth had its microphone. Elijah stood at the center of the stage. His hands held a single sheet of paper, slightly crumpled at the corners. The ink smudged where his fingers had pressed too tightly. He looked up. Rows and rows of students, parents, teachers, and somewhere, in the middle, Ms. Rivera, eyes locked on him. Brandon slouched in his chair, arms folded. Principal Reynolds, frozen. Elijah took a breath, then spoke. They told me I didn't belong. The room went still. They told me I wasn't smart. Enough that I wasn't one of them. He looked at Brandon but didn't say his name. They told me I cheated, that my hard work was suspicious, that my dreams made people uncomfortable. He paused. No one moved. But what they didn't know was that I come from a mother who prays for me harder than anyone celebrates me, from a teacher who refused to let me disappear, from a legacy built not on acceptance, but on resistance. A ripple in the crowd. Some parents leaned forward. Some students whispered, wide-eyed. You tried to erase me, Elijah continued, his voice steady, clear, and full. But I rebuilt my future from the pieces you tried to break. You handed me silence, and I turned it into a voice. He looked around the gym, scanning the stunned faces. Today I'm not here because you let me be. I'm here because I refuse to not be. A single clap, then 2. Then the gym exploded with applause, not polite, not performative, thunderous, relentless. real. Some stood, some cried, even Ms. Rivera wiped her cheeks, and Principal Reynolds? He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes, because for the first time in years, he wasn't in control. Elijah nodded, folded the speech, and stepped back. He didn't wait for approval, didn't wait for permission. He just stood tall, because that moment wasn't a victory, it was vindication. After the ceremony, cameras followed Elijah as he walked through the crowd. Local reporters began to whisper. Teachers who once ignored him now reached out to shake his hand. Even Brandon stayed in his seat, silent, no longer smiling. In the parking lot, Elijah's mom hugged him so tight he could barely breathe. "You didn't just graduate," she whispered. "You rose." Music swells, rich strings and soft piano chords rising in slow, powerful harmony. Voiceover whisper for emotional impact. They gave him a stage to silence him, but he used it to speak for every kid who's ever been doubted. The ceremony continued, but something had shifted. The applause still echoed in the walls. The crowd hadn't settled, and Principal Reynolds looked like a man unraveling in real time. He returned to the podium, hands slightly trembling. His speech was next. He cleared his throat, forced a smile. Well, that was quite the passionate address. His voice cracked slightly, trying to regain control. Here at Crestwood, we value every student's journey, even those that take unexpected paths. A few teachers looked down. Some exchanged glances. He continued anyway. "We've always believed in second chances and growth," and a sudden voice interrupted. "Then maybe it's time you practiced what you preach." The room turned. It was Mr. Dawson, a social studies teacher nearing retirement, quiet, usually passive. Today, not anymore. "We all saw what happened this semester," Dawson said, standing slowly. "We saw who was lifted up, and who was left behind." Reynolds froze. "I don't think this is the time or place." "No," Dawson cut in, "it's exactly the time, and this is the place." Gasps rippled across the room. Another teacher rose. "You suspended a student without evidence." Then another. "You knew who really planted the answers." Then Ms. Rivera stood, calm but resolute. "You protected a lie and tried to bury a legacy." Reynolds' face had gone pale. He glanced toward the superintendent, who had just arrived at the back of the room and was taking notes. Elijah watched it unfold from the side of the stage, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about a pattern, about a system that failed students like him over and over again. But today, it had been cracked. After the final names were read and the caps had flown into the air, Principal Reynolds tried to slip out quietly, but Ms. Rivera intercepted him. "You'll be hearing from the board," she said, "and from the parents, and from every teacher who's done staying silent." Reynolds didn't respond, didn't defend, just nodded slightly, like a man who finally realized the house he built wasn't going to stand much longer. Outside, Elijah stood by the courtyard fountain, taking photos with his mom and little brother. No medals, no stage lights, just a feeling he hadn't had in a long time. Freedom. Music softens into a reflective, hopeful theme. Gentle strings, subtle resolution. Voiceover. Whisper, "He didn't burn the system down. He let the truth do that for him." The sun was beginning to set as families filed out of the auditorium. But the whispers? They weren't fading. Did you hear what Elijah said? "I didn't know they covered it up." That teacher stood up, finally. Word spread like wildfire. Someone had filmed Elijah's speech. Within hours, it was posted to social media. And by the next morning, it went viral. 200,000 views, then 500,000. Then national news picked it up. Black students' graduation. Speech exposes systemic injustice at elite school. People started asking questions. Journalists reached out. Former students came forward. Some said they too had faced unfair discipline. Others said they had seen how Principal Reynolds treated students of color differently. The school board, which had ignored complaints for years, could no longer look away. Elijah didn't make a statement. He didn't need to. His speech was still echoing. At home, he received hundreds of messages, some hateful, but most ungrateful, from kids who had been silenced, from parents who had given up hope, from teachers who had once stayed quiet, but now wanted to speak, and through it all Elijah stayed grounded. No interviews, no spotlight chasing. He still helped Jaden with homework, still made dinner when his mom worked late. Fame wasn't the point. Dignity was. Meanwhile, at Crestwood, high changes began. Reynolds was placed on leave pending investigation. A third-party equity review was launched. Ms. Rivera was promoted to Director of Student Advocacy, and for the first time, students were asked what they needed to feel safe, seen, and supported. Elijah received a letter from the state university. They'd seen his speech, and they weren't just offering admission. They offered a full academic scholarship, with housing and research funding. His hands trembled as he read the words. He placed the letter on the table and stared at it. He had done it, without compromising, without begging, by standing in truth. That night, he sat on the roof of his apartment, stars above him, city lights below. Jaden climbed up beside him and leaned on his shoulder. "Are you famous now?" the little boy asked. Elijah smiled. "I'm not famous. Just seen." Music swells, full emotional orchestration, hopeful and strong. Voiceover whisper. They tried to erase him with a single lie, but the truth wrote him back into history. 2 months later, summer was in full swing. The school halls were quiet, the lockers empty, the classrooms dark. But one room still had lights on. Ms. Rivera's office. Stacks of files sat open, letters from students, notes from teachers now. Feeling brave enough to speak, she smiled faintly as she pinned a photo on the wall. Elijah Kapdir's gown, hand raised. The caption beneath it read, "He didn't wait for the world to change. He changed it anyway." Across town, Principal Reynolds sat at a long wooden table in front of the school board. Sweat lined his collar. "We trusted you," one member said. "But you trusted a system built on silence more than the students it was meant to serve." He tried to explain. He blamed protocol, he cited miscommunication, but no one was listening anymore, because the truth had already been spoken, by a boy they tried to silence, by a voice that wouldn't go away. Reynolds was officially dismissed, not just from Crestwood, but from education entirely. His name, once printed in programs and banners, now filed away in a closed investigation report. Meanwhile, Elijah was preparing for something else. College. He walked into the dorm lobby for the first time. Wearing a new hoodie, nervous and excited, a student ambassador approached. "Elijah Brooks?" "Yeah," he said, half smiling. "Dude, your speech? We watched it in my ethics class. That was insane." Elijah laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, it got bigger than I expected. You're gonna fit in just fine here." They fist bumped, and just like that, he wasn't the outsider anymore. The first week of classes, Elijah sat near the front of the lecture hall, a habit he kept now. No, more hiding in the back. When the professor asked a question, he raised his hand, confident, calm, heard. That weekend, Elijah received a package at his dorm, no return address. Inside was a small velvet box. He opened it slowly. It was the medal. The one Brandon had worn, the one Elijah never asked for but always deserved. Tucked beneath it, a note. "It should have been yours. I'm sorry it took me this long to realize it. B." Elijah stared at it for a long time, then closed the box, not bitter, just at peace. Music begins to lift, warm, rising, full of hope. Voiceover whisper. Sometimes justice takes longer than it should, but when it comes, it rewrites everything. 1 year later, Crestwood High had changed. A new principal, new policies, more diverse faculty, and one major addition, a small scholarship fund created quietly by anonymous donors. But the name of the scholarship, the Elijah Brooks Future Leaders Award. Elijah didn't know about it right away. He found out when a reporter contacted him for a local story. "How does it feel," she asked, "to have your name inspire others?" He smiled, not with pride, but with humility. "If one kid walks into school and doesn't have to shrink themselves, because I didn't shrink, then it was all worth it." Back on campus, Elijah had started mentoring younger students, especially those who felt unseen. He hosted weekend study groups, helped write college essays, brought pizza and stories. He didn't talk about what happened much, because it was never about the past. It was about what came after. One afternoon, after a long session, Elijah walked alone to the student center. There was a mural on the side of the building, recently painted. It showed silhouettes of students holding books, microphones, diplomas, and in the center, a boy, head held high, standing at a podium, no face drawn, just a name beneath. We rise because he stood. He stared at it for a while, then took out his phone, took a picture, and sent it to his mom. She replied with just 3 words, "I'm still crying." That night, Elijah sat on the campus green looking up at the stars again, just like he did with Jaden a year ago. Another student walked by. "Yo, Elijah, you coming to the leadership dinner?" He paused, then stood. "Yeah, let's go." Because now, he wasn't just surviving, he was leading. Music swells for the final time, hopeful, inspiring, complete. Voiceover whisper, closing line. He walked into a system that tried to silence him, and left behind a legacy that speaks louder than ever. Fade out.